June 22, 1987. One decision, one name. A mistake so catastrophic it didn't just ruin a season, it cursed a franchise for an entire generation. The location is New York City. The stakes are the future of the NBA. The Los Angeles Clippers are on the clock with the fourth pick, holding a winning lottery ticket in their trembling hands. The entire basketball world is screaming at them to take the raw, hungry talent named Scottie Pippen. But they don't. Instead, they chose the safe bet. They chose the golden boy from Georgetown. They chose Reggie Williams. And in that split second, they didn't just draft a player, they signed his professional death warrant. But here is the secret the history books won't tell you. Reggie Williams wasn't the problem. He was the victim. He was thrown into a glamorous, rotting meat grinder that would have chewed up Michael Jordan himself. Was he a bust, or was he sabotaged by the most toxic organization in sports history? Today, we are opening the sealed files. We are exposing the greed, the incompetence, and the hidden tragedy of the man who was supposed to be a legend, but became the face of a curse. Welcome to the truth they didn't want you to see. To understand the tragedy, you first have to understand the height from which he fell. Before the disappointment, before the booing crowds in Los Angeles, Reggie Williams was nothing short of basketball royalty. He wasn't just a good player, he was the Prince of Georgetown. In the mid-'80s, college basketball was bigger than the professional league in many parts of America. And the Georgetown Hoyas were the villains everyone loved to hate. They were tough, they were physical, and they were led by a man who was more of a military general than a coach, John Thompson. Under Thompson's iron-fisted rule, Reggie Williams flourished. He was part of that legendary 1984 championship team, playing alongside Patrick Ewing. But while Ewing was the brute force, Reggie was the smooth operator. He was Mr. Clutch. When the game was on the line, when the lights were hottest, the ball went to Reggie, and Reggie didn't miss. He was an All-American. He was the Big East Player of the Year. He had a smile that could sell toothpaste and a jump shot that could break hearts. In the eyes of the scouts, he was the can't-miss prospect. He was the safe harbor in a storm. But here is the secret that no one wanted to admit back then. Georgetown was a fortress. Coach Thompson protected his players from the media, from the agents, and from the harsh realities of the world. Reggie lived in a bubble of success. He was told he was great, he was treated like a king on campus, and he never had to deal with losing. He was programmed to win, but he was not programmed to survive a disaster. And he had no idea that he was about to leave this protected paradise and walk straight into a buzzsaw. The scouts looked at his stats, they looked at his rings, but they didn't look at his soul. They didn't ask the most important question. What happens to the golden boy when the gold starts to peel off? Let's go back to that fateful night in 1987. The tension in the room was suffocating. The first three picks went exactly as planned. David Robinson, Armin Gilliam, Dennis Hobson, and then silence fell over the room. It was time for the Los Angeles Clippers. Now you have to understand, in 1987, the Chicago Bulls were desperately trying to make a trade. They wanted that pick. They had their eyes on Scottie Pippen. But the Clippers held the keys. Rumors were flying around the room like vultures. There were whispers, dark, unsubstantiated whispers, that Pippen had health issues, that he was too fragile for the big leagues. And there sat Reggie Williams. He looked the part. He had the pedigree. The Clippers management, desperate for a headline, desperate to sell tickets to a fan base that was laughing at them, took the bait. They announced the name, Reggie Williams. The camera cut to Reggie. He stood up, hugged his family, put on that Clippers hat. He was smiling. But looking back at that footage today, it looks less like a celebration and more like a sentencing hearing. At that exact moment, Scottie Pippen was still on the board. Reggie Miller was still on the board. Kevin Johnson was still on the board. The Clippers had a winning lottery ticket in their hands, and they essentially set it on fire. Reggie Williams didn't know it yet, but he had just been handed a poisoned chalice. He wasn't going to a team, he was going to a graveyard of talent. And the unfairness of it all is staggering, because the moment the commissioner read his name, the clock started ticking. The world expected him to be Magic Johnson. The world expected him to save a sinking ship. But he was just a 23-year-old kid who had never known failure, about to be thrown into the deep end with an anchor tied to his ankle. You cannot tell the story of Reggie Williams without diving into the murky, chaotic waters of the Los Angeles Clippers in the late 80s. To call them a professional basketball team would be a generous overstatement. They were a traveling circus, and the ringmaster was none other than Donald Sterling. We won't go into the legal troubles that would bury Sterling decades later, but in 1987 his reputation was already complicated. He was known for being notoriously cheap. We are talking about an owner who allegedly questioned why the team needed to pay for ankle tape or comfortable socks. Reggie Williams came from Georgetown, a program that was run with military precision, where excellence was the standard. He walked into the Clippers' locker room and found anarchy. It was a culture shock that would have broken anyone. Imagine being used to five-star treatment and supreme discipline, and suddenly you are playing for an organization that feels more like a rec league team running on a shoestring budget. There was no support system. There was no veteran leadership to put an arm around the rookie and show him the ropes. It was every man for himself. The Clipper curse wasn't some supernatural voodoo, it was gross negligence. The team played in the shadow of the mighty Lakers. While Magic and Kareem were sipping champagne and winning titles just down the road, the Clippers were the punchline of every joke on late-night television. And Reggie? He was supposed to be the face of this disaster. He was the highest draft pick they had in years. The pressure was immediate and crushing. He wasn't just expected to play well, he was expected to perform a miracle. He was expected to turn water into wine, but the Clippers didn't even provide the water. The tragic irony is that Reggie was a winner who had forgotten how to lose, and he had just joined a team that knew nothing else. The psychological toll began to mount from day one. Let's talk about money. In 1987, the ink on Reggie Williams's contract was barely dry when his life changed forever. We are talking about millions of dollars, numbers that would make a factory worker in Ohio faint. For a young man coming out of the strict, disciplined structure of college, this wasn't just a payday, it was an avalanche. Suddenly, the kid who had to ask permission to speak in practice was holding the keys to the kingdom. And let me tell you, Los Angeles in the late 80s was a kingdom designed to devour young princes. It was the era of excess. Wall Street was booming, the cars were flashy, and the temptations were everywhere. Reggie was thrust into a world of yes men, agents, hangers-on, distant cousins, who suddenly remembered his birthday. They all wanted a piece of the pie. The Golden Cage is a terrifying place. You have everything you ever wanted, but you are trapped by the expectations that come with the check. He bought the cars, he bought the clothes, he looked the part of an NBA superstar, but insiders from that era whisper that the money was a tranquilizer. It numbed the pain of what was happening on the court. Imagine being 23 years old in a city that never sleeps. The clubs, the bright lights, the constant attention. It is a heady mix that has intoxicated stronger men than Reggie Williams. While his bank account was growing, his hunger, that desperate, starving need to win that defined him at Georgetown, was under siege. The tragedy here isn't that he spent money, it's that the money created a false sense of security. He thought he had made it. But in the NBA, getting the check is the easy part. Earning it every single night against the best athletes on the planet, that is a different beast entirely. And while Reggie was navigating this new life of luxury, the sharks in the league were smelling blood in the water. Then came the basketball. If the draft was a nightmare, the first season was a slow-motion car crash. The fans in the Los Angeles sports arena were expecting Magic Johnson Part 2. They wanted flash, they wanted dazzle, they wanted showtime. What they got was a rookie who looked lost. You have to remember, the NBA in the late 80s was a war zone. It wasn't the spacing and three-point shooting league we see today. It was the era of the bad boy Pistons. It was the era of physical intimidation. If you drove to the basket, you didn't get a foul call, you got knocked to the floor. Reggie Williams, the smooth, gliding scorer from college, hit a concrete wall. The veterans of the league took one look at the high draft pick with the big contract and decided to teach him a lesson. Every night was a physical beating. He was pushed, shoved, and bullied. And the worst part? The Clippers were losing. And I don't mean they were losing close games, they were getting blown out. For a guy who had won a national championship, who was used to winning 90% of his games, this was psychological torture. The stats tell a deceptive story. If you look at the box scores from 1987, you might see Reggie scoring 10, 12 points a game. Not terrible, right? But in the NBA, there is a term for points scored on a bad team: empty calories. They don't nourish you. They don't lead to wins. He was scoring when the game was already out of reach. The fans saw through it. The murmurs began in the stands. He's too slow. He can't create his own shot. He's soft. The whispers grew into shouts. The honeymoon was over before it even began. The savior of the franchise was drowning, and nobody on the Clippers bench had a life preserver to throw him. But if losing wasn't bad enough, Reggie Williams had to deal with a ghost named Scottie Pippen. While Reggie was struggling to find his footing in the chaos of Los Angeles, something miraculous was happening in Chicago. That risky pick, the kid from Arkansas that the Clippers passed on, he was blossoming. He was growing into a defensive monster. He was running the floor like a gazelle, and he was playing next to Michael Jordan. The media, always hungry for a narrative, started to turn the knife. Every time Pippen had a great game, the headlines in Los Angeles would scream, "Look what we missed." Imagine the psychological toll that takes on a man. It wasn't just about Reggie's performance anymore. His entire career was being framed as a what if. He wasn't judged on his own merits. He was judged against the phantom of the player he wasn't. It is the cruelest form of comparison. Pippen had Phil Jackson as a coach. Pippen had Jordan as a mentor. Pippen had a structure designed to make him succeed. Reggie had chaos. He had a revolving door of coaches. He had teammates who were more interested in their own stats than the team's success. Yet the narrative was simple. Pippen is a star, Williams is a bust. It ignored the context. It ignored the environment. But that is the nature of the beast. The shadow of Scottie Pippen became a heavy cloak that Reggie had to wear every single day. It weighed him down. It made every missed shot feel like a catastrophe. He wasn't just fighting the opponent, he was fighting history. And history, as we know, is written by the winners. In the eyes of the public, the verdict was in. The Clippers had made a catastrophic mistake, and Reggie was the living proof of their incompetence. But the rot didn't just come from the stands or the newspapers, it was festering right there inside the locker room. You have to understand the psychology of a losing team. When a team wins, everyone is a brother, everyone sacrifices. But when a team loses, night after night, blowout after blowout, the locker room becomes a shark tank. In the late 80s, the Clippers weren't just losing games, they were losing their dignity. And in that environment, survival instincts kick in. It became a culture of, "I've got to get mine." Reggie Williams walked into a room full of grown men who were fighting for their next contract. They didn't care about developing a rookie. They didn't care about the long-term future of the franchise because they knew they probably wouldn't be there next year. They looked at Reggie with his high draft status and his guaranteed money, and they didn't see a teammate. They saw a threat. They saw a kid who hadn't paid his dues. The ball stopped moving. The defensive rotations stopped happening. It was 5 individuals playing a game of pickup basketball while wearing professional uniforms. For a player like Reggie, whose entire game at Georgetown was built on trust, on the system, on the idea that if you cut, the ball will find you, this was basketball hell. He would make the right cut, and the ball wouldn't come. He would set the screen, and his teammate would wave him off to take a bad shot. You can see it in the old game tapes if you look closely, the slump of the shoulders, the hands on the hips. It wasn't just frustration, it was isolation. He was trapped in a toxic soup of ego and desperation. The coaching staff? They were a revolving door. Gene Shue, Don Casey, they were just men trying to hold back the tide with a spoon. They couldn't fix the culture because the culture was broken from the owner's box down to the ball boy. Reggie wasn't being developed. He was being cannibalized by his own team. And then the inevitable happened. The love affair with the fans, which had been rocky from the start, turned into open hostility. There is a specific sound in a sports arena that is worse than silence. It is the low rumble of a home crowd booing their own player. By his third season, Reggie Williams knew that sound intimately. The word bust began to appear in print. It is a heavy, ugly word. It sticks to a player like tar. It doesn't matter what you do in practice. It doesn't matter how hard you try. Once the label is applied, it is almost impossible to peel off. The Los Angeles media, notorious for building heroes up just to tear them down, smelled blood. They wrote scathing columns asking why the Clippers were cursed with this choice. They mocked his shooting percentage. They questioned his heart. Imagine being in your early 20s, reading the morning paper, and seeing your face next to headlines declaring you a failure. It destroys your confidence. And in professional sports, confidence is everything. When you hesitate, you miss. When you think too much, you turn the ball over. Reggie started pressing. He tried to do too much to prove them wrong, and that only made it worse. He became the scapegoat for a franchise that had been failing for a decade. It was easier for the fans to blame the failed draft pick than to blame the incompetent ownership or the lack of a scouting department. Reggie became the face of their frustration. Every missed shot was met with groans. Every turnover was a confirmation of their bias. He was walking onto the court carrying the weight of a city's disappointment on his back, and his knees were beginning to buckle. The bright smile from draft night was gone, replaced by the grimace of a man who just wanted the season to end. He was a disappointment, not because he wasn't a professional basketball player, but because he wasn't the savior they had invented in their heads. By November of 1989, the writing was on the wall. The situation had become untenable. The Clippers had to make a move, not just for the team, but perhaps to save Reggie from being completely destroyed. The trade came down like a gavel in a courtroom. Reggie Williams was sent to the Cleveland Cavaliers, but this wasn't a fresh start filled with balloons and parades. It was a trade born of desperation. The Clippers sent him away along with the rights to Danny Ferry in a blockbuster deal that brought Ron Harper to Los Angeles. Now, pause and think about the cruelty of this timing. Ron Harper was a star. The fans in Cleveland absolutely adored him. They were heartbroken to lose him. So Reggie didn't walk into a welcoming embrace in Cleveland. He walked into a city that was furious they had lost their hero. He was the consolation prize. He was the guy they got in exchange for the guy they loved. It was out of the frying pan and into the fire. But for Reggie, leaving Los Angeles must have felt like escaping a burning building. He packed his bags. There were no tearful goodbyes at the airport. There was no tribute video, just a plane ticket and a realization that the Hollywood dream was dead. He was leaving the glitz and glamour for the gray skies of Ohio. But in that flight there was a glimmer of hope. He was leaving the Clipper curse behind. He was no longer the number 4 pick who had to save a franchise. Now he was just a journeyman, a player trying to find a role. It was a humble step down, but it was also a liberation. The pressure cooker of L.A. was behind him, but the question remained. Was he damaged goods? Had the Clippers broken him so thoroughly that he could never be put back together? As he landed in Cleveland, nobody knew the answer. Not the coaches, not the fans, and certainly not Reggie Williams himself. After the gray skies of Cleveland, Reggie Williams found himself under the scorching sun of Texas, the San Antonio Spurs. Now this wasn't just another team, This was a military operation disguised as a basketball franchise. They had the Admiral, David Robinson, a man carved out of granite and righteousness. For Reggie, this should have been paradise. No more chaos. No more losing culture. Just structure, discipline, and a clear hierarchy. But here is the cruel twist of the NBA. Sometimes finding a good situation is harder than surviving a bad one. In Los Angeles, Reggie was the designated savior. In San Antonio, he was just a guy. He was a spare part. The Spurs didn't need him to score 20 points a night. They needed him to defend, to hit open shots, and to stay out of Robinson's way. It was a complete identity crisis. Imagine spending your whole life believing you are the lead actor, only to be handed a script where you are man in background number 3. He played hard. He had moments where that old Georgetown brilliance shone through. A smooth drive to the basket, a steal in the passing lane. But the shadow of the draft bust followed him to Texas like a bad smell. The fans in San Antonio were polite, but they didn't love him. He was a rental. He was a stopgap solution. And for a player who thrives on confidence, on feeling needed, this was a slow, quiet kind of death. He was efficient, yes. He was professional, absolutely. But the spark, the fire that made him a legend in college, it was flickering out. He was becoming exactly what the critics said he was, a journeyman, a player who wears the jersey but doesn't own the team. And just as he was starting to unpack his bags, the phone rang again. The NBA is a business, and inventory must be moved. But destiny, as it turns out, has a sense of humor. Just when it seemed like Reggie Williams was destined to fade into obscurity, he landed in the high altitude of Colorado. The Denver Nuggets, 1991. This wasn't a team, it was a gang of cast-offs, youngsters, and wild cards. They had the eccentric Dikembe Mutombo, the misunderstood Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, and the explosive LaFonso Ellis. And they had Reggie. Something clicked in the thin air of the Rocky Mountains. For the first time since Georgetown, Reggie wasn't looking over his shoulder. Coach Dan Issel didn't treat him like a failed draft pick. He treated him like a veteran who had survived the war. He gave Reggie the green light. "Go play," he said, and Reggie played. He became the glue guy, the steady hand in a chaotic, high-flying offense. He started scoring. He started leading. The bust was suddenly averaging 13, 14, 18 points a game in stretches. Then came 1994, the playoffs, the moment that would etch this group into history forever. The Denver Nuggets, the 8th seed, barely sneaking into the postseason, facing the mighty Seattle Supersonics, the best team in the league, led by Gary Payton and Shawn Kemp. The experts said it would be a sweep. They laughed at Denver. But they forgot one thing. These guys had nothing to lose. Reggie Williams had nothing to lose. He had already been called a failure. He had already been traded. He played with a desperate, beautiful freedom. The series went to a deciding Game 5 in Seattle. The tension was unbearable. And in that series, Reggie was immense. He wasn't the superstar, but he was the warrior they needed. He hit clutch shots. He battled on defense. When the final buzzer sounded and Mutombo fell to the floor clutching the ball in tears of joy, Reggie was right there. They had done the impossible. They had become the first 8th seed to knock out a number 1 seed. For one glorious spring, Reggie Williams wasn't the guy from the Clippers. He was a giant killer. He was a winner again. It was redemption, sweet and undeniable. But fairy tales in the NBA don't end with happily ever after. They end with free agency. The high of Denver eventually faded. The team broke up, and Reggie entered the next phase of his career, the nomad years. Denver to Indiana, Indiana to New Jersey. This is the part of the story that the highlight reels don't show. We see the games, but we don't see the boxes. Imagine living your life in 6-month increments. You sign a contract, you move to a new city. You find an apartment you don't really like because you know you won't be there long. You learn the names of your teammates only to be traded before you learn the names of their kids. This is the suitcase life. For Reggie, a man approaching his 30s, the physical toll was brutal, but the emotional toll was worse. How do you build a home when your address changes every season? How do you maintain relationships when you are never in one place? He became a veteran presence. That is code for, we need you to sit on the bench and teach the young guys how to be professionals. It is a noble role, but it is also a humbling one. He watched young rookies come into the league, kids who looked at him not as a former star, but as an old man holding on. He saw the same mistakes he made being repeated, the flashy cars, the bad investments. He tried to warn them, but youth rarely listens to experience until it's too late. In New Jersey, wearing a Nets jersey that felt foreign, Reggie Williams was still fighting. His knees were aching. The explosiveness was gone. But the pride? The pride was still there. He was surviving in a league that tries to chew you up every single day. He was a survivor of the Clippers, a hero of Denver, and now a soldier for hire. He wasn't chasing glory anymore. He was chasing one more paycheck, one more year, one more moment on the court before the lights went out. For good. By the mid-90s, the smooth, effortless glide that defined Reggie Williams at Georgetown was gone. In its place was something far more mechanical, far more painful. You see, the human body is not designed to run up and down hardwood floors for 82 nights a year, while 300-pound giants try to knock you into the third row. The NBA of that era was a contact sport. Hand-checking was legal. Hard fouls were a badge of honor. And Reggie? He had been taking a beating for nearly a decade. We don't talk enough about the morning after. The fans see the dunk, the buzzer beater, the smile for the camera. They don't see the player at 3 a.m., unable to sleep because his knees are throbbing like a toothache. They don't see the bag of ice taped to every joint. By his final years in the league, Reggie was playing on borrowed time. The cartilage was wearing thin. The back spasms were becoming a constant companion. There is a dark secret in professional sports known as pain management. In the 90s, team doctors were often more like mechanics than healers. Their job wasn't necessarily to fix you for life, it was to patch you up for Tuesday night against the Knicks. Cortisone shots, anti-inflammatories, a handful of pills just to get through practice. Did Reggie rely on them? We can only speculate, but almost everyone did. It was the culture. You played hurt. If you didn't, someone else would take your spot. Reggie Williams was a warrior, but even warriors bleed. He was losing his step. The young kids, the Iversons, the Kobes, were blowing past him. And in his eyes you could see the terrifying realization his body, his greatest asset, was becoming his enemy. The instrument he had tuned to perfection was finally breaking down. Now let's talk about the green, the money. When Reggie signed that rookie contract, it felt like an endless river of cash. But here is the cold, hard truth about NBA wealth in the 80s and 90s. It wasn't generational wealth like it is today. These guys weren't making $50 million a year. They were making good money, sure, but they were also spending it in an era of predatory financial advice and zero oversight. Where did the money go? It's the question that haunts every retired player. For a guy like Reggie, the pressure to take care of everyone was immense. It is the silent killer of athletes, the friends from the neighborhood who need a loan for a business idea that never exists, the family members who suddenly need a new roof, a new car, a new life. It is hard to say no when you are the golden boy. It is hard to close the wallet when everyone is looking at you like a walking ATM. And let's not forget the lifestyle. In Los Angeles, keeping up appearances was part of the job. The custom suits, the jewelry, the high-end real estate. It burns through a bank account faster than you can imagine. By the time Reggie was bouncing around from Denver to Indiana to New Jersey, the checks were getting smaller. The endorsements had dried up. He wasn't the face of a franchise anymore. He was an employee. Did he stare at his bank statements with a cold sweat in the middle of the night? Did he wonder if he had enough to last the next 40 years? The statistics are terrifying. 60% of NBA players go broke within 5 years of retirement. Reggie had to be smarter than that. He had to fight not just for rebounds, but for his financial survival against a system designed to strip him bare. Retirement. In the real world, it's a celebration. Gold watches, cake, a pension. In professional sports, it is a funeral. They call it the little death. For Reggie Williams, the end didn't come with a parade. There was no farewell tour. There was no jersey retirement ceremony at the Clippers arena. It was just silence. The phone stopped ringing. The agents stopped calling. The adrenaline that had fueled him since he was a teenager simply evaporated. Imagine waking up at 33 years old. You have the rest of your life ahead of you, but the only thing you know how to do, the only thing that gave you value in the eyes of the world, is over. You are a former player. That word former hangs over your head like a dark cloud. Who is Reggie Williams if he isn't wearing a uniform? Is he a husband, a father, a businessman? He had to reinvent himself from scratch. The transition is brutal. We have seen legends lose their minds in this phase. The depression, the loss of identity. You go from hearing 20,000 people scream your name to sitting in a quiet living room watching SportsCenter talk about the new stars. It is a humbling, lonely experience. Reggie faded into the shadows. He didn't chase the spotlight. He didn't become a loud-mouthed analyst on TV screaming for attention. He chose dignity. But don't mistake his silence for peace. The internal battle to accept that the glory days are gone is a war that is fought in the quiet moments, in the mirror, when the applause is just a memory, echoing in an empty room. He was a gladiator who had left the arena, leaving his armor and his youth behind on the floor. But Reggie Williams did not disappear into the void. He did something that many former stars are too proud to do. He picked up a whistle. He went back to the roots. There is a profound irony here. The man whose professional career was derailed by chaotic coaching and a lack of structure decided to become the very thing he needed most back in 1987, a mentor. He returned to Georgetown, to the shadow of John Thompson, and later took on head coaching jobs at the high school and collegiate levels. Why do the failed stars make the best teachers? Think about it. Magic Johnson tried coaching. It was a disaster. Michael Jordan tried running a team. It was complicated. But Reggie, he knew pain. He knew what it felt like to be on top of the world on draft night and to be at the bottom of the barrel 2 years later. He wasn't teaching kids how to be superstars. He was teaching them how to be survivors. He was teaching them that talent is nothing without mental toughness. Picture him on the sidelines. He isn't screaming for the cameras. He is pulling a young player aside, looking him in the eye, and telling him the truth that agents won't say. He is telling them about the sharks in the water. He is telling them about the emptiness of the golden cage. When Reggie Williams speaks to a young athlete, he isn't speaking from a pedestal of perfection. He is speaking from the trenches of experience. He is trying to save them from his own fate. It is a noble second act. He traded the roar of the arena for the squeak of sneakers in a high school gym. And in doing so, he found a purpose that the NBA could never give him. He wasn't saving a franchise anymore. He was saving souls. Now we have to address the elephant in the room. The name Reggie in the 90s meant two very different things depending on which jersey you wore. In Indiana, Reggie Miller was becoming a cultural icon. He was fighting with Spike Lee. He was hitting impossible three-pointers. He was becoming a brand. In Los Angeles, and later everywhere else, Reggie Williams was the other Reggie. The quiet one. The one who didn't make the all-star teams. And then there is Scottie Pippen, the man the Clippers passed on. Pippen ended up with 6 rings. 6. He is in every conversation about the greatest players of all time. But let me ask you a question that will keep you up at night. If the Bulls had drafted Reggie Williams and the Clippers had drafted Scottie Pippen, would history be reversed? Would Pippen have crumbled under the chaos of the Clippers? Would Reggie have become a Hall of Famer playing next to Jordan? It is the ultimate sliding doors moment. We judge players by their trophies, but we ignore the soil in which they were planted. Pippen was planted in fertile ground. Reggie was planted in concrete. It is a cruel, unfair comparison, but it is one that Reggie has had to live with every single day of his life. Every time he turns on the TV and sees Pippen talking about his legacy, a part of him must wonder, that could have been me. That should have been me. Fate is not a straight line, it is a lottery. And in the draft of 1987, Reggie Williams held the winning ticket to a losing game. It is a bitterness that doesn't scream, but it whispers in the quiet moments of reflection. As we look back at Reggie Williams's career, we are also looking at the tombstone of an era. The NBA of the 80s and early 90s is gone, dead and buried. Today, players are friends. They work out together in the summer. They have dinner after the games. They demand trades if they are unhappy. But back then, it was a blood sport. You didn't like your opponent. You wanted to destroy him. Reggie Williams was a soldier in that war. He played in the era of hand-checking, where a defender could steer you with his forearm like a steer. He played when driving to the lane meant risking a concussion, not just hoping for a free throw. He was a 6'7" forward who had to bang bodies with the likes of Charles Oakley and Rick Mahorn. He didn't have load management. He didn't sit out games because of soreness. He taped it up, took a pill, and went to work. There is a gritty nostalgia to his story. He represents a generation of players who were tough as nails, but were ultimately treated as disposable labor by the league. They didn't have social media to build their brands. Their brand was their reputation on the court. Reggie wasn't a viral sensation. He was a grinder. He was the guy who did the dirty work while the stars took the credit. And now, as we watch the modern game with its high scores and friendly rivalries, we have to ask, do we miss the Reggies of the world? Do we miss the guys who looked like they were fighting for their lives every possession? He is a relic of a harder, colder, but perhaps more honest time. A time when you earned every single point with sweat and blood. Now, before we close the file on Reggie Williams, we must listen to the whispers in the hallways. History is written by the winners, but the truth is often found in the murmurs of the losers. If you talk to the old scouts, the men with whiskey on their breath and a lifetime of regret in their eyes, they will tell you a different story about 1987. The critics, the evil tongues of the sports world, are merciless. They will tell you that Reggie Williams was soft. They will say he lacked the killer instinct that defined the era. They point to the footage of him being shoved around by the Detroit Pistons or the New York Knicks and say, see, he was a boy in a man's world. They claim that his success at Georgetown was a mirage, a product of a system that hid his flaws. To them, he is the ultimate cautionary tale of a system player who couldn't improvise when the structure collapsed. They call him the $4 million mistake, a label that hangs around his neck like a millstone. But then, you talk to the men who actually laced up their sneakers next to him. You talk to the teammates in Denver who saw him diving for loose balls when they were down by 20 points. They tell a story of a professional, a man who never complained in the press, a man who showed up to practice early when half the team was hungover from the night before. They argue that Reggie was a victim of circumstance. Put Michael Jordan on those Clippers teams, one insider famously said, and even he might have lost his mind. And here is the darkest whisper of all, the conspiracy that still circulates in the smoky backrooms of the league. Some say the Clippers knew what they were doing. There are rumors of a secret medical report on Scottie Pippen, fears about his back, his migraines, his longevity. Did the Clippers pick Reggie not because they were stupid, but because they were trying to be safe? Did they choose the reliable Georgetown graduate over the risky unknown from Central Arkansas because they were terrified of making a mistake? If true, it is the ultimate irony. In trying to avoid a risk, they walked right into a disaster. The safe bet turned out to be the most dangerous gamble of all. And so, we reach the end of the road. The lights in the arena have dimmed. The crowds have gone home. And standing at center court, in the quiet aftermath of a decade-long storm, is Reggie Williams. When you look at his career on paper, 10 years, over 7,000 points, almost 3,000 rebounds, it doesn't look like a tragedy. It looks like a solid, respectable career. Most players dream of lasting 3 years in the NBA. Reggie lasted 10. He survived the toxic waste dump of the Sterling-era Clippers. He survived the humiliation of being traded for a fan favorite. He survived the physical brutality of the 90s. He survived the financial predators and the psychological warfare. So, was he a failure, or was he the ultimate survivor? We love to worship the gods of the game, the Jordans, the Magics, the Birds. We build statues for them. But the NBA is built on the backs of men like Reggie Williams, the men who fill the lanes, who set the screens, who take the blame when things go wrong. He didn't become a legend. He didn't change the game, but he endured. In a world that wanted to chew him up and spit him out, he refused to break. He took the money, he took the hits, and he walked away on his own 2 feet. Perhaps the real tragedy isn't Reggie Williams's career. The tragedy is our expectation. We demanded that he be a savior, and when he turned out to be just a very good basketball player, we couldn't forgive him. But tonight, as we close this investigation, let's give him the respect he was denied in 1987. He is the man who lived through the nightmare of the Clippers and lived to tell the tale. He is the ghost of what could have been, but more importantly, he is the flesh and blood of what was. A man, a professional, a survivor. And in the end, isn't survival the greatest victory of all?